It's rarely about the object. That's the part most people misunderstand. Someone reaches for your phone, your laptop, your notebook, something small, something ordinary, and your reaction is immediate. A subtle tension, a quick interruption, maybe even irritation that feels stronger than the situation seems to justify. To others, it looks excessive, protective, sometimes even difficult. But psychologically, reactions like this are not random. They follow a pattern, and that pattern usually has very little to do with the item itself. There's a certain kind of person who doesn't just own things, they structure their world through them. Their belongings are not just tools. They are part of a system. Where things are placed, how they are used, who interacts with them. These details create a sense of order. And when someone crosses into that system without awareness, it doesn't just feel like physical contact. It feels like disruption. The first trait behind this behavior is heightened boundary sensitivity. Everyone has boundaries, but not everyone experiences them with the same intensity. For some individuals, boundaries are more immediate, more physical, and more clearly defined. Personal belongings become extensions of those boundaries. They represent a line between what is internal and what is external. When someone touches those items without permission, it is processed not as a neutral action, but as a boundary violation, even if no harm was intended. The second trait is a strong need for environmental control. This is often misunderstood as rigidity, but in reality, it is about predictability. When objects are arranged in a certain way, the environment becomes stable. The brain knows what to expect. It doesn't have to constantly reevaluate. This reduces cognitive load. But when someone else interacts with those objects, moves them, uses them, even slightly changes them, that predictability is disrupted. And for individuals who rely on structure, even small disruptions feel disproportionately significant. The third trait is the psychological extension of identity into objects. Some people separate themselves clearly from what they own. Others don't. Their belongings carry meaning. A notebook is not just paper. It may contain private thoughts. A workspace is not just functional. It reflects how they think. A phone is not just a device. It holds personal information, habits, patterns. When someone touches these items, it can feel like an indirect intrusion into something more personal than what is visible. The fourth trait is sensitivity to disorder. This doesn't always mean visible perfection or extreme neatness. It means alignment. The external environment mirrors an internal structure. When that alignment is disrupted, even slightly, the internal system reacts. This is why some people immediately notice when something has been moved, even if the change is minor. It's not about control for its own sake. It's about maintaining coherence between internal and external order. The fifth trait is a preference for permission-based interaction. For these individuals, the difference between "can I use this?" and simply taking it is not small, it is fundamental. Permission signals recognition of boundaries. It shows awareness. Without that signal, the action feels automatic, unconsidered, and therefore intrusive. It's not the use of the object that creates discomfort, it's the absence of acknowledgement. The sixth trait is learned boundary reinforcement from past experience. People don't develop strong reactions without a history behind them. Repeated situations where boundaries were ignored, belongings were mishandled, or privacy was violated can shape this behavior over time. The brain adapts. It becomes more protective, not because every situation is dangerous, but because it has learned that lack of protection leads to discomfort or loss of control. The seventh trait is cognitive load management. Some individuals operate with a higher baseline of internal processing. They think more, notice more, analyze more. For them, the environment is not just a backdrop, it is part of how they maintain clarity. When that environment changes unexpectedly, it adds additional processing demand. Protecting their space becomes a way to reduce unnecessary cognitive strain. There is also an important emotional layer. When someone touches a personal item without permission, the reaction is often not just about the present moment. It can trigger a broader feeling of being overlooked or not considered. The action becomes symbolic. It represents a lack of awareness, not just a physical interaction. And because of that, the emotional response can feel stronger than expected. Another factor is the difference in perception between individuals. Not everyone assigns the same meaning to objects. One person sees a shared item. Another sees something clearly personal. This mismatch creates friction. Without communication, Each side assumes their perception is obvious. But it isn't. What feels neutral to one person can feel invasive to another. Interestingly, people who are protective of their belongings are often highly consistent in other areas of life. They tend to value structure, clarity, and intentionality. Their systems may not always be visible, but they exist. And when those systems are respected, these individuals are usually more flexible than they appear. It's the lack of recognition that creates resistance, not the interaction itself. There is also a strong connection to trust. When trust is high, sensitivity often decreases. The individual becomes more comfortable with others interacting with their belongings because the risk feels lower. This suggests that the behavior is not fixed. It adapts based on context and relationship. However, when trust is uncertain or boundaries are unclear, the opposite happens. The individual becomes more protective. Not because they want distance, but because they want stability. Their behavior is not about rejecting others. It is about managing uncertainty. Another important distinction is between protection and rigidity. Protecting personal space is functional. It allows the individual to maintain clarity and control. But when protection becomes inflexible, it can create tension in shared environments. The challenge is not to remove boundaries, but to make them communicable. When others understand the system, interaction becomes easier. There is also a social misunderstanding that often happens here. People who react strongly to others touching their belongings are labeled as difficult, overly sensitive, or controlling. But these labels oversimplify the behavior. They ignore the structure behind it. The reaction is not random. It is consistent with how the individual processes space, ownership, and control. From a psychological perspective, this behavior is not about being difficult. It is about maintaining a system that allows the person to function the way they need to. A system where boundaries are clear, where the environment is predictable, where identity, privacy, and control are not constantly being disrupted. And once you understand that, the reaction stops looking exaggerated. It starts looking logical. Because when something represents more than just itself, protecting it is not overreacting. It's maintaining stability in a way that others may not immediately see. Personally, I've always found that when someone reacts strongly to their belongings being touched, it's usually not about the item. It's about what that item helps them maintain. There's often an invisible structure behind it, something that keeps their thinking clear or their environment stable. And maybe the real shift happens when you stop seeing that reaction as difficult and start seeing it as someone quietly protecting a system that works for them, even if it doesn't look obvious from the outside. So I hope people don't misunderstand these individuals and instead respect them.